Hi, everyone. For those of you who have not met before, I'm Stacey. So I'm one of Flow's learning experience designers. And I'm joined today with Phil Hudson-Evans, who is of Fraser's Hospitality, and Camilla Woods from Hospitality Action. Hi, both.
Hello.
Hi. Today we're going to be talking about well-being in the industry, and we're going to be focusing on, your guys' particular pain points and, real practical ways that we can get better at promoting well-being and being there for our teams. So if I can ask everyone who's here if they could put in their name, where they're from, and a particular pain point they're having around well-being right now into the chat, we'll kick off with that and hopefully answer some questions as we go. It can be anything about what you're experiencing right now. And don't worry if you can't think of anything in particular, because we will do a Q&A at the end. So if any questions kind of come to you as we go through, just pop them in and hopefully we'll get them answered for you in due course.
It's exciting to see where everyone's joining from.
I know, right? It's the beauty of the beauty of the pandemic, because it sounds a bit weird, but talking to people you wouldn't normally see or hear from.
Sure.
Okay, so James from Flow is saying that stress is the main thing for him. He has some challenging people in his team. Now that's my boss, so I wonder who he's talking about. Not me, surely. Yeah, stress is always a big one, I think, and especially now. I imagine that everyone at some point over the past year has experienced some stress on some level. I don't think it's been escapable, really. Got Darius from Cambridgeshire.
Oh, nice. Not far from me, Darius. We're representing the east of England.
Very good.
Lovely. Bethany from Flow. How do you know what is best to help the most amount of people?
Great question.
Yeah, brilliant question. We'll definitely be speaking about that as we go through. Tracy and Alex from Elite Pubs. Hi. Cool. Amazing. So, feel free to keep putting stuff in the chat. We'll be checking it throughout. But I think we can kick off with the panel if Phil and Camilla, if you're ready.
Absolutely.
Nice.
Sure.
Cool. So, first and foremost, I think we're all at a point now where we've kind of heard a lot about well-being, and it's a real hot topic, and you can look online and there's just so much stuff out there, and it can be pretty overwhelming really about what the best thing to do is for people, what a well-being issue actually is. So I just want your guys' kind of hot take in a nutshell, like what do you think good well-being in our industry actually looks like? So start with Phil.
Oh, on the spot there. I think no, that's great. I think well-being is being aware of everything that impacts us. I think we culturally we talk more about our physical well-being, perhaps more than our overall well-being as people. I think in an industry, I don't think it's industry specific. I think that we have, as society, started to see more and more conversation around well-being. I think that what we have a responsibility to do as an industry is be part of the conversation and be part of the solution as well. So, I certainly don't profess to be a well-being expert. I know that we have some wonderful people in our business that are really championing this, and I'm proud to be a part of that. But actually, I think we're all learning about well-being, and for me, that's the important thing, and that's certainly something we're advocating in our business.
Definitely, yeah. Like, there's no one right answer, and if there was, I don't think anyone knows it yet. So we are just learning. Camilla, what do you think about that?
Yeah, absolutely, Stacey. I mean, building on what Phil has said, I think it's a really good question. It's a really big question, actually. And I think for me, it's really about, as Phil says, we're sort of on this journey with wellbeing, but I think it really starts with, the values, behaviours, and the actions that take place in your business. And I don't know whether people are familiar with the Hoteliers Charter that launched maybe about a year ago. And I think their kind of commitment to workplace wellbeing really encapsulates what wellbeing is for me. So they talk very much about providing a workplace as an environment that's built on foundations of respect and fairness, equality, diversity, and opportunity, and that you place your colleagues' wellness and career development at the heart of your operation. So for me, I think that's a really good foundation to build on. And that sort of aligns with, your policies and procedures as a business. And that's really your sort of preventative work, your sort of duty of care to your employees. But then the nice thing that you can do to build on that is then look at your specific policies and procedures around well-being. So what can you do really proactively to support your team? And there's loads of good stuff out there, which I know we're going to get on to when we discuss things in a bit more detail. But yeah, that for me is what sort of encapsulates well-being, that really firm foundation, and then you build on that.
Yeah, totally. And I think that Phil, you were mentioning earlier that you'd been recently involved in some resilience training for your teams, and it makes me think that, like, our industry, is wonderful and it's so unique in so many ways, but there's a lot of our industry that poses challenges that maybe a lot of other industries don't experience for their staff. So I'm thinking about things like the extremely busy seasons and the late nights and the alcohol culture and the fact that you are around customers all the time, and you're told that resilience is kind of key for those positions. And talking about, Camilla, about policy and laying a foundation, do you think that there is there something to be said about, do we need to start looking at our culture and trying to change that? Can we change that with the nature of our industry, or is it more about, the kind of the training and the resilience sessions and the building people up that way?
I think in some ways it's a bit of both. I think when you're looking at the training and when you're sort of perhaps talking to your team, one of the things that we always recommend at Hospitality Action is doing regular health and wellbeing sort of check-ins with your team and asking them how they're feeling. And we say, do it very simply. So perhaps say, how is your mental health? Score it on a 1 to 10. How do you feel supported? What could the organisation do to support your mental health better? And I think from that, you can see where you might be able to change some things within your organisation. And it could be perhaps changing a rota. It could be something quite simple. It might be something that you would have to get senior level, buy-in on or budget for. So I think within your own organisation, if you kind of know your pain points, as you were saying, there may be things that you can do. I think, the nature of the industry is that we do need to perhaps sort of, I often feel some of the situations that we deal with at Hospitality Action, it makes me realise that we're quite a frontline industry. As you say, we deal with customers, we deal with some quite difficult situations sometimes. So actually training for your team and for your managers about how to deal with some of those more challenging situations is really important. But it's also really important to kind of know, I think, within that team, how you get that support as well. So to have really thought about how perhaps you might support the team, because, the nature of the industry sometimes is, it's long hours, it's demanding. There are challenges perhaps other industries don't face. But, so it's a bit of both, really, I think. But Phil, over to you as well.
Sure. Yeah, I think absolutely it's cultural. It 100% has to be cultural. I think people can see through those empty gestures. I'm sure we've all heard of organisations putting a fruit bowl on a side and saying it's part of our wellbeing initiative. Well, it's much more than that. It's an essential, and it's what people expect, and it's certainly what people expect across lots of different industries, and certainly in hospitality we should be no different to that. I think it's a real essential now. I think it's about normalising the conversation and using those policies and frameworks, but using them as a facilitated way to have a great conversation, not just making a tick box. I think we can all come up with wellness action plans that absolutely have a place, but it's the conversation that sits around them. So that's empowering our people, empowering our leaders to be able to have a really great conversation. And I think that's probably the thing that underpins all of this.
Mm-hmm. Totally. And I mean, you know, we've had some people in the chat saying some of their pain points are, you know, they feel that maybe their staff are a bit scared to kind of like start that conversation, and maybe, like, you know, discussing things such as well-being feels like a bit of a failure, like if they're having a hard time. And, you know, the conversation just being not one that's, you know, typically not been that of a common one to have, you know, like a lot of places you kind of historically would join, and, you know, you didn't really talk about what to do if you were having a hard time. It was just kind of, I'll figure this out if and when it happens. And, you know, like, for example, the Royal Society for Public Health have said that about 1/4 of hospitality staff have needed, you know, medical support for their mental health, and that 2/3 of them don't think the industry can support them. So, you know, what can people do to get that trust of their staff and to be like, you know, listen, like, we want to help and we mean it, and, you know, kind of make people feel like they can approach that conversation a bit easier and that they are going to be sort of listened to in the first place, you know, kind of bridging that gap.
I'll go first on this one if you like, Camilla. I think for me, it's about taking the time to truly listen to people. So let's go back a step. Our journey kind of came from a wellness and mental health policy, but a policy is purely that. It's a policy. I think there's much more cultural stuff that sits around it that brings it to life. And a key part of that is really working on our ability to walk in other people's shoes for a bit, and understand their perspective. That doesn't mean relating it to our world, because everyone's experience is unique and different to them, but allowing our people the opportunity to speak and feel listened to. So I think there's a big piece around empathy that's important, around taking the time to listen and not just use that conversation as your chance to think about what you're going to say next, but really listen to what's said by your people, but also what's not said. You know, what's the body language, what isn't being told, and really being aware of changes in behavior, changes in attitude, and being able to comfortably have conversations that come from a place of listening and come from a place of empathy and understanding, really.
Yeah, totally.
And I absolutely agree with what Phil's saying there. And I think, you know, that for me comes back to the importance of supporting and training managers and helping them sort of understand around sort of, you know, the mental health awareness training, how to have those conversations. Sometimes people can be really reticent about starting that conversation with an employee. And so some training can be really helpful for managers, to just some top tips about how to start those conversations and start it in a way that kind of opens up a conversation rather than closes down a conversation. So instead of like perhaps saying things like, oh, I noticed perhaps you've been a bit down lately, you know, do you want to talk about it? Not like, we need to sort out why you're always late, you know. So it's that kind of balance, and the tone and the language you use can be really important in building that trust. And I think also here it's sort of for managers and for other employees to know your boundaries, because actually you will sometimes be presented with issues that you really don't know how to solve for someone, but you need to maybe step back and say, well, actually, it's not my responsibility to solve this, but I can signpost, I can do that active listening that Phil is talking about. And I can, you know, if you've got something like an employee assistance program within your business, an employee assistance program is a great tool to signpost people to for support, because it's independent, it's confidential, and it gives people that safe space to open up without perhaps that fear, as you say, of, if I admit to how I'm feeling, or I admit to somebody, my manager, that I'm worried about my behavior towards alcohol or drugs or gambling, you could feel that that's going to impair, you know, your chances of staying within that role, of career development. So actually having that safe, confidential, independent space that an EAP can provide is a really important you know, tool to have when you're looking at your kind of your well-being. And as Phil says, building on that policy, it's not just a tick box. You know, if you show to your team that you listen and you act on the things that they're saying that they might like to have change within the business, within the realms of possibility, that can really be a very kind of strong way to kind of build up that trust and loyalty in any of the kind of wellness activities you're looking to sort of implement in the business. And I mean, just one last thing on that, I know from my own experience running HA's EAP, when I look at the kind of reporting that we do for clients, when I see that someone's been referred to the program by a manager, that's a big plus for me, because I think, oh yes, the manager really understands the kind of way that the EAP works. And then the other one for me, which I absolutely always love to see, is referred by another employee, because then I know that they're engaged with the program, it's valued, they're trusting it, and it's having an impact for them. It's something that they feel that they can use for support. So yeah, that's kind of my view on it as well.
Amazing. Yeah. And obviously you just mentioned the Hospitality Actions Employee Assistance Program, and the beauty of that being that, you know, you've kind of got that expert kind of help like on hand, and it's confidential. My question is though, like, how would you recommend somebody like implement that into their business? Because I guess there's a lot to be said about how that's set up so that it doesn't kind of feel that if an employee is going to their manager, they're kind of being referred. They're kind of like, oh, you know, we don't look after your problems, these people do. So like, what would your advice be to really integrate that in a way that where it feels like an extension of their kind of company ethos and, you know, part of the same support system?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think, again, it's back to that open culture and that communication. So we always say to people, you know, when you launch it, really stress that it's independent, it's confidential, it's 24/7, you can self-refer, you can do what we call a managed referral, but that's in a way that respects people's confidentiality. So I think if you're in HR or you're the manager implementing it, you really need to kind of stress that it's independent, it's confidential, nothing gets reported back. But on that kind of wider scale, when you're launching it, I think it's kind of think about where would you introduce that in the kind of employees' sort of journey at work. So, you know, if they're a new employee, make sure it's there in induction, make sure you're putting posters up, make sure everyone has their booklet. But things like awareness days can be really good ways just to remind people of the services that are available. So things like Employee Appreciation Day or Mental Health Awareness Week, you know, you might be able to do an event or something at work that just reminds people in that sort of light touch way that that service is there. Anything you do, I always say, like if you're going to do a survey about wellbeing, anything like that, don't really make these things mandatory. You know, you must phone. I expect you to call. You know, sometimes people might phone up and say, "Did this employee call?" And I say, "And I can't tell you that because it's confidential." So I suppose for managers, it's just saying, look at what the service can do. It's for your team to use, but we'll report back to you at that kind of top level so that you can look at perhaps there might be a particular stress point in a particular department, a particular region of your business, and we can then talk to you about kind of measures that you can take in terms of training or looking at your policies and things like that. But yes, like you say, it's for people to use the service confidentially. So I think that's what people need to remember, that it's a safe space for them to get support. And I just should say as well as the EAP, we do have a helpline, 24/7 helpline. That's for anyone in the industry to call. So again, more details on that are on our website. So.
Thank you for bringing that up. That's a really valuable kind of tool. I don't think people know enough about that. There's like a 24-hour helpline. You know, you don't have to be at work to get help necessarily. No. You can call whenever you need it. Yeah. Sorry, Phil, I think you were going to say something.
Sure. Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I think in my experience, you know, outside of hospitality, the employee assistance programs that are available are often the most under signposted and underutilized, and certainly what I've been delighted to see within my Maison, Hotel de Van and Fraser's Hospitality is, you know, that's really signposted through the colleague journey and translated into a way that's simple for people to understand how it can add value. I think to answer the point around how we get our people to recognise that it's a useful tool, I think part of that comes from our management and leadership teams. You know, that old adage of being a manager doesn't mean you need to know everything. So actually in a conversation being able to say, no, I'm not an expert in this, but what I am going to do is point out a really brilliant resource that's free and confidential that can help you, that will give you some additional support. And I'm here the whole time to support you in the way I can in my role, but actually for that specialist support, let me point you in the direction of an organisation that can really help you. And I think it's being able to acknowledge that there's a line as a manager that we don't know the answers to everything, but the great thing is being able to use those resources and make those recommendations that really connect people with experts. I think it's important.
Yeah, Definitely, yeah. I think such a good point. You don't have to have all the answers, but and referring is totally fine if that's going to get the person the help they need, and it's much better than just being like, I don't know, like what to do here. It's giving somebody something to go off rather than saying that there's nothing to be done, kind of thing, which can be tricky. And like people, we've got some people in the audience today talking about that. Like a well-being issue can be anything really, that it can be on any scale if it affects how you are feeling and behaving and acting. But for the things that are a bit more delicate, so suffering from very personal or like health issues, how what would your advice be on how you kind of approach those issues specifically? Do you think it needs a different touch? Does it require more practiced hands? What do you think about that?
Shall I go first, Phil? Are you sort of saying, so Stacey, specifically if someone approached you with an issue, perhaps, for example, around sort of addictive behaviours or something like that, how would you perhaps support that person? So, I mean, one of the things that we recommend, and if you have an employee assistance program, you will often have this, is that we have a managerial advice line. So that's often a really good place for a manager to start and say, someone has approached me, I'm not quite sure how to support them. What are as Phil was saying, what are the boundaries of my support, and where should I be referring into more professional help? So something like a managerial advice line can sort of talk you through the different scenarios, can sort of assess where that person is. Is it a really acute need? Are we now talking actually at having to move them into kind of NHS support? Are we talking residential support? There's a whole, as you say, layers of different types of support depending on the nature of the issues. And so I'm specifically using addiction as an example here. So if perhaps the person has kind of made those first steps and has sort of become sober and as sort of it's actually about maintaining sobriety, that's where a kind of managed referral can really help. So you refer someone into your employee assistance program, they will be assessed for counselling support, and you as the manager, as long as you have the consent of your employee, can see how they engage with that service. It's all very top line. You won't get the kind of detail of what is discussed in counselling sessions, but you will see that someone has engaged. You'll also see if they haven't engaged, which is another indicator. If they're not ready to engage, then perhaps you have to kind of think again about how you support them within the business. Will they need to take some time away? Will you have to look at sort of how you sort of reintegrate them into the business? So using that kind of structured support of a managerial referral can be a really powerful way to support someone. And often it means if you want to retain them within the business, you can get some really good outcomes. Otherwise, perhaps if you don't have that layer of support, you may lose them from the business. So yeah, there's that way of kind of a more structured approach that you can do through managerial support and managed referral.
Yeah.
And I would absolutely say, Camilla, totally endorse that. I think JK makes a really good point in the comment section around providing access to EAPs is great. There's still a real danger. People feel pushed away and managers think they've dealt with the situation. How we support the managers is a crucial bit. And I totally agree. And I think that's the thing, sharing that resource doesn't mean that your job's done as a manager. And I think you're totally right. And that's the cultural work that's ongoing, I'm sure, in many organisations. So would totally agree.
Yeah. And I think we did some research last year about, did managers feel that they had enough kind of training and support, and sort of, it was a 50-50, to be honest. Some said yes, some said no. And I think as Phil's saying, that the more kind of training, the more you can have that open culture and talk about it as managers and leaders about, how do we support people? How do we support mental health? If a senior leader is speaking out about mental health, it has a really big impact on the rest of the team, and it encourages people to use those services for managers to perhaps speak up and say, well, I want to support my team, but I don't really know how. Can we put some training in? Can we set up a mental health sort of support network in-house? So peer-to-peer support can be really valuable, particularly if people have got lived experience of mental health. That can be a very powerful resource to have within your business, because again, it normalizes the conversation and makes people realize that everybody will suffer from poor mental health on occasion. It's a spectrum, and we'll all have good days and bad days. And I think if we can acknowledge that, again, it helps us normalise the conversation.
Yeah.
Definitely, and that's certainly some work we've been doing. So Kate Lee's our head of HR, connected through her network ultimately with the Burnt Chef Project, which is a great charity looking at mental health awareness across the hospitality industry, and we've been doing a lot of work with them to support our managers in understanding how they can support best, and supporting our people in supporting each other and themselves too. So would totally agree, Camilla.
Yeah, great. Yeah, and I mean, you know, outside of hospitality, you know, across the world, we know that over the past few years, the kind of stigma around mental health has, you know, been really pulled into the light, and really, you know, people are really trying to break that stigma. And, you know, it makes me think that how we do that in hospitality as well is really important, because, you know, again, we have the same kind of, you know, like challenges that everyone else in the world has around mental health, but then we've also got the kind of, you know, stereotypes of for example, like, you know, the angry chef, or the people that will like take all the hours they can, and they're like, oh, I'm absolutely fine, like I don't understand why so and so needs time off when I can just power through. And I'm trying to think about, you know, how do we kind of balance breaking down those barriers and those stigmas and balance business needs. So, you know, you see a lot of businesses who are giving staff more time off, or you know, more like robust initiatives. Kind of, what would you say to those people who think that that's not quite achievable for them? What can they do?
I mean, I would say it's absolutely is achievable. It can definitely seem daunting to start with, and I think, you know, to say to the employee, you're not alone in feeling this. I mean, actually, a recent statistic from Mine said that, you know, 56% of employers said they'd like to do more to improve staff well-being, but they don't feel they have the right training or guidance. So I think it's, you know, the first thing is to acknowledge that you're not alone, perhaps, in feeling that is a really daunting thing. But I think it's always about, as I've said before, just starting simply, you know, looking. I think someone said it in the comments about kind of what good well-being would mean in your business. Does that mean, you know, less staff absence, a better work-life balance, as you were saying, that kind of establishing that culture of a good work-life balance? There's some really good initiatives in the NHS actually about switching off and stepping away, and having a kind of posters up that say, you know, at the end of your shift, perhaps sort of think about what went well, what didn't go so well, do a good handover to the next person coming on shift, and then go home and get some rest and switch off. So again, it's that kind of, if you setting up that culture, and that culture becomes more of the norm, even if you are putting in a long shift or a double shift, but actually when you know that you can step away, and switch off, and that is accepted. You know, I know there's always a challenge. We are often always on culture at the moment, but I think there's things that we can do as employers to sort of actually say, no, that's not our culture. Our culture is one of people being able to, you know, switch off at the end of the day. And I think, as I say, it really is just starting simply, like Phil was saying at Fraser, it's putting in, you know, an employee assistance program, signposting, training, but don't feel like you have to do everything all at once. You know, just take some steps, see how they work, monitor it, evaluate it, you know, be honest about what has worked and what hasn't worked, and also don't sort of fret too much if something doesn't land well first time. You know, try it again in a different way. Talk to someone like us who, you know, provide an EAP, provide training and advice. We're always here to talk to people and say, well, you could try it this way if that didn't work that way, or what about doing it this way? So I think it's just, yeah, keeping a sort of open mind about the fact that you are at the start of a journey. And as I said, I think before we were live, I've been working with some clients for about 8 years, and every year we do something different and we improve and we find a different way to support. So yeah, start small and build from there, really.
Yeah.
And I would totally add to that as well, around you don't have to build it all yourself. And I think Camilla does a great job there of talking about how she partners with people. So work with industry partners, who's in your network, who's got contacts. Our contact with the Burnt Chef Project came about through a mutual contact on LinkedIn, and seek out those people who really share those same values as yourself. I think when it comes to content, really it's a range. Give people a choice of whether they access any of it. First off, I think you can't force people to explore stuff. I think some wellbeing initiatives turn into a feeling that you have to be involved. So during lockdown 3, we ran a program of activity to help our people stay connected to the business. So engagement activities, learning activities, loads of different things, which was a really successful campaign. But we were really clear at the start of that, that's for people if they want to join. You know, they don't have to. So making stuff available is great. Making a range of tools and resources available is great. So that might be a classroom session. That might be a wellness action plan and a brilliant conversation with your manager. That might be some self-directed learning. I think giving people a range of tools that they can learn from and explore in a way that works for them is really great. And I think it's about leaving those tools and signposting and making available, but also not forcing people down a route of you must attend X workshop on X date.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think it is that range, and that just sort of, it's there if you need it, but you don't have to. And one of the things, and again, if people want to have a look on our website or our YouTube site, we did some video, little infographics, sort of animations about how we support, because we felt that some of our collateral was a little bit wordy and a little bit off-putting, and we have to kind of have stuff that actually goes into a lot of detail because we're running a clinical service. But actually, if you're accessing that service, you don't necessarily need to know all of that, but actually, you know, doing a sort of simple infographic or a video can be really powerful to show someone how they can start their own journey. So we did one around somebody that was in a lot of debt, and we did another one around someone who had a gambling and alcohol addiction, and 2 or 3 minute video, really impactful. So yeah, lots of different tools I think that you can use, and as Phil was saying, so Burnt Chef is a great project. Unilever have their Fair Kitchens initiative. You've got the Hoteliers Charter. Mind have a huge number of resources for workplace support. So there's a lot out there. I think sometimes sort of navigating that can be a bit of a challenge, but I think those industry specific ones and organizations like Mind or Rethink Mental Health are really good places to start. There's some really, really good information and resources on all of those sites, as well as articles for Hospitality Action. So, but yes.
Yeah. Amazing. Yeah. I mean, at Flow, we've recently just, released a free mental wellness resource, which is kind of very much of a, like, you know, if you need this, it's here. And it focuses on how you can build your own mental wellness, you know, through, you know, building resilience, coping with stress, practicing mindfulness and all those things. And I think we're seeing a lot of stuff that is very kind of aimed at, like, building your own mental wellness and well-being, which is really, really important. And I want to kind of jump back a little bit in the conversation when we were talking about training our managers up for how to kind of deal with, I say deal with, which makes it sound like a huge, you know, problem, but, you know, how to help their staff through mental well-being issues. And we had some comments in the chat about empathy, and can you actually train that? Can you learn that? And how would you go about increasing that kind of empathy awareness, like in your business? Like what's an actually effective way to do that? Because it's such a tricky kind of soft skill, I guess, to kind of master. Like you hear people say that others are born with it, but like can you become more empathetic? Like, what do you think?
I think we could have 4 hours on this. I think from my professional view in the world of people development, I would always be an advocate for the work of Carol Dweck and growth mindset, and you know the skills you're born with are not fixed. You can always grow and learn new things. I think empathy absolutely comes to some people perhaps more naturally than others. But I guess at the same time, we all have a baseline of how we would want ourselves or our best friends or our family to be treated in a situation. So I think making it really, really simple for people and asking how they'd want their close relative to be supported in a challenging situation is a good starting point. Do I think you can learn empathy? I think you can learn skills that mean you become naturally more empathetic if you put them into practice. I think what we can all do is create a culture that is more empathetic. I think there's a brilliant question from Bethany around how you find the time in people's busy schedules to prioritize making the sessions. I think it's about understanding the impact on people if we don't do that, understanding the impact on an organization and the culture within it if we don't make time and space for these types of conversations. And then when those conversations take place, making sure that we're actively listening, like we spoke earlier on, and really understanding how we can help and perhaps how others can help too, and what other resources there are. I don't know what you think, Camilla.
No, I agree. I think it's really I would agree with you that it is about that people could sort of I would hesitate to use the word improve, but the active listening, the empathy, these are things that with some sort of training, and I think some of it, a lot of the time, is people are just really nervous to sort of start those conversations, and they fear they're going to say the wrong thing. And I think that's where mental health awareness or resilience training can be really good, because actually 9 times out of 10 you're probably not going to say the wrong thing, but actually some training, the training that we do, for example, we look at sort of conversation starters and top tips and things. And again, kind of, I think Phil mentioned it earlier, knowing your boundaries. You can say, well, I can help you with this. I really want to listen, and I want to understand, or am I hearing this correctly? This is what you're saying to me. But then it's saying, well, I can help you with this, but actually I would like to do this and refer you somewhere else or signpost you somewhere else, because I think these people could really help you. So sometimes it's actually also having a good knowledge of where you can signpost. So, it's great if you've got an EAP in place in your business, but if you haven't, there are other resources that you can signpost people to. There's other services out there. So again, it's for managers perhaps just being aware that there of those support networks that you can refer people to as well, because you can be a really good active listener, but at the same time you're going to need to signpost them elsewhere because it's not within your gift to be able to help. It's not appropriate actually sometimes for you to be able to help. They need the support from the NHS or a counsellor, something like that. So just knowing those boundaries, I think, is really important, and not being too hard on yourself that you are referring onwards. Actually, that's a perfectly reasonable thing to do. So yes, I think that for me is really important, actually, just maintaining those boundaries, but also being able to have those, feeling comfortable enough to have those conversations as well is really important. And I do think that's where your training and your culture comes in. And I think perhaps the more that you have those conversations, perhaps not necessarily easier they become, but they're more normal to you. They're just something that you do as the manager. So it's probably just having that first conversation is probably going to be the hardest one you have, and then from there on you can sort of build from there.
Sure.
And I think that ties in, Camilla, right, to the whole sharing our stories piece. Never underestimate the power of storytelling, of sharing your experiences, and always being mindful of that your experiences are unique to you, of course, but kind of normalizing the conversation. And I think the fact of the matter is we all have tough times. We all have times where perhaps mental health or wellness is impacted. And I think if you're comfortable to share your experiences, you're halfway there to creating a culture where those conversations are normalized and can take place.
Absolutely agree. And I think that whole thing about sort of you can badge it up as something like a sort of mental health champions or advocates within your business, but absolutely, as Phil says, employees at all levels, if they're talking openly about mental health, it really sends a clear message, that employees are going to be supported if they're experiencing a mental health problem. And also, it's not a barrier to career development. If you've got someone very senior being very open. There was a great article a couple of years ago, I think, in The Caterer, where managers talked about their own experiences of mental health, and that was quite unusual, for the managers to be openly out there talking. And I thought that was an excellent kind of article, because it showed that any level in the business you can experience, as Phil says, tough times, things that will. And I think it's also mindful of being aware that everyone's got different triggers. So something that you might not find upsetting, if it's happened to someone previously, actually, everyone will react to a situation in a different way. So again, one of the things that we take a look at, and we haven't really got time to talk about it today, but is how you actually deal with crises within the business. So your whole crisis management is also really important in terms of kind of, as we're saying, supporting managers and supporting individuals. But that's a whole other conversation. But I think that's a key thing to think about as well, around kind of crisis management, as well as that kind of mental health support within the business.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, there's a lot to it, you know, and like every part of your business will have an impact on, you know, your staff's well-being. And, you know, I guess it goes back to what we've been saying all along, like you don't have to sort it all out in one go. You can kind of start quite small. And I think another kind of thing that I've noticed doing research around mental well-being and wellness is there's a lot out there about empowering people who are having a hard time, empowering employees to reach out when they're struggling. Now, my question off the back of that about having a more open conversation is how, you know, sometimes people don't necessarily realize how much they're struggling until further down the line when it's a bit more of a serious issue. What would you say to like managers and shift supervisors about, you know, signs to look out for, or when to kind of, you know, check in with a person proactively in this industry where a lot of the time we just turn up and get on with it, even when we're not feeling 100%?
I think it comes back to what Phil was talking about earlier. You know, for us, some of the signs would be sort of real changes in people's behaviour. So if someone's becoming withdrawn, they're not sort of socialising in the same way, or interacting in the same way with colleagues, they're persistently late, or but you know, it can just be such a variety actually of sort of different people will react in different ways, or you'll see different signs. So I suppose it's one of the things about hospitality is, I think, a lot of us work within small teams, within small units, so you do tend to know your colleagues quite well. So I suppose it's those changes in what we call, you know, normal inverted commas behaviours are the ones to look out for. And again, as I was saying earlier, it's perhaps having conversations in a sort of sensitive way that kind of open up dialogue rather than close it down. So, you know, don't do it in front of everyone else. Perhaps sort of, you know, find a quiet time at the end of service, or, you know, in a sort of more private sort of environment, things like that. And also sometimes people won't want to talk initially. And I know I've had cases where it's taken up to 2 years to get someone the support they need. And that just happens sometimes, that people aren't quite ready. And that case actually had a really positive outcome. But at the start of that, you would have thought, actually, we're never going to be able to help this person. But actually, just by I suppose keeping an eye on that person, being aware perhaps of what they're going through, but as Phil says, kind of not forcing them to kind of say, you know, you must open up, you must tell me what's going on with you, but just having, as a manager, just thinking, well, I will just check in every so often with that person. And it's also, I think that's having those regular, if you can have those regular one-to-ones with your team, and just sort of, you know, check in with them, see how they're doing. And there's a really good thing on the Mind website for self-care called 5 Ways to Wellbeing. And it talks about connecting with your team and really listening and really thinking about what that person is saying to you. So there are some really good tips on, as I say, places like Mind about kind of wellbeing at work. So I would recommend checking out 5 Ways to Wellbeing for, you know, those kind of situations where you might want to kind of start connecting with people and checking in a bit more if you're particularly concerned. So
yeah. Totally.
I think there's just a couple of things I'd add there. Totally agree. I think from a organisational perspective, what we've certainly done is invest in mental health first aider support, for example. So we've made a commitment that by the end of this year we'll have a mental health first aider in each of our locations, which is important to support our people. I think broader than that, though, probably going back to the culture conversation, actually it ties into checking ourselves and being able to offer people feedback and checking the language we use. So, you know, I remember a long time ago in my career talking about perhaps someone who had stress or depression but was seen out at a party, and actually the current day me might have challenged the former day me on how I responded to that situation. You know, what does stress and depression mean? Does it mean I'm in bed, you know, sleeping through the day? Perhaps not, but quite possibly not at all. So I think increasing our awareness, increasing our understanding, and being able to challenge the language and terminology we use, I think is also really important to creating that environment where you can have those conversations.
Absolutely.
Such a good point. Yeah, I think, like, again, kind of going back up to what you said, Camilla, about like noticing people's behavior and stuff. When you're in the midst of a busy shift, it can be so easy to just be like, they're in a bad mood, or if somebody says something problematic, just to kind of let it wash over you. And I think it's all about building that kind of awareness around that, and knowing that those are the prime moments to make a difference, and say, how are you actually doing? I've noticed this is how you're being, or like, oh, why did you say that? And, open a bit of a discussion. And I think that's a really great way that not only, those who are in charge can get involved, but the whole team can. And, I think, I've been seeing more and more of like mental well-being and wellness being more and more associated with like diversity and inclusion training, because it's like, it might not necessarily be a protected characteristic that we're having to look after, but people can come into discrimination against how they're feeling, and the requirements they need to work happily and healthily. Other people can be prejudiced about that, and it's just good to see how they kind of tie into one another. We're wanting to make our places fair for everyone, and a lot of that can be even in the words you say. So yeah, it's very interesting.
I think it's absolutely, as you say, Stacey, it kind of comes back to communication and how you communicate. And if you've had someone step out of the business for a while because of a mental health problem, it's actually really important when they kind of come back into the business that you've communicated within the boundaries of confidentiality kind of why that person has been out, and kind of the support they might need when they come in, because it can be easy to kind of almost unbalance the working environment, because someone might be a bit kind of, as Phil was saying, you might be a bit resentful. Well, why have they been off for 4 weeks? What was that all about? I'm working really hard. Why did they suddenly just get a chance to step back? So it is all back to that kind of open communication culture, and thinking about how you need to support that person as they reintegrate into the business. So yeah, language, communication, that culture of openness, I think they're really key things to think about when you're looking at well-being within your business.
Yeah, totally. And I think there's so many ways that you can do that don't have to necessarily be labeled as a well-being initiative or well-being training. I think there's so many kind of group building activities, and just normal like day-to-day how you do tasks. You see more and more people doing buddy systems at work, and I think you can improve that kind of channel of communication without explicitly saying that's what you're trying to do, basically. I think it can kind of organically grow if you know how to do it, and if you kind of encourage that through your whole process of induction and training, and company nights out, for instance. And is that inclusive? Is everyone involved? Do people come along to those? Do they or are there people that are sitting them out? Why are they sitting them out? Is there something culturally there, or are they going through something? And yeah, I think there's a lot you can do. So that's kind of coming to an end of all the questions I had for you guys. So now I'm going to open up the floor and get some questions from the audience in. I'm also going to just look at a few of the pain points that people have shared throughout, and just see if there's anything we haven't covered. So I'm just having a little look at my chat. So again, something that people kind of bring up, and we kind of touched on this a little bit about, what would you say to people who say a wellbeing initiative isn't achievable for them? What about, the chances of restrictions in the face of the pandemic continuing? Like, fingers crossed we're on our way out, but like, what if they do continue? Like, what kind of, interventions are possible remotely, for instance? We've got the employee assistant program and the helpline, but how else when you're not necessarily as connected to your whole team as you want to be?
I think over the last year we've got much better at using the tools that are available to us to share content. I think there's a whole load of free resources, free content. I think if you want a face-to-face style session. You know, we've come on leaps and bounds with our virtual classroom technologies. I think there's a lot of resources out there. I think it's really understanding the challenges you're trying to overcome, and then identifying what resources, what support, what networks are available to you to help with that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that network's so important. You know, reach out to other people that you've seen do some really interesting work around wellbeing. Look at those resources, and I think, you know, almost you can turn that question on its head. You know, what will happen if you don't look after people's wellbeing? Because actually, if you look at it in terms of what's happened in the last 18 months, we've all been on a kind of psychological journey because of COVID-19. We don't really know yet the kind of long-term impact. So, you know, some of your team coming back could feel euphoria, happiness, we're getting back more to normality. Others might feel anger, depressed, anxious, worried about debt that they've built up while on furlough. So you've got a whole range of sort of situations, emotions, feelings. So I think, you know, even if you think it's daunting, I think if you don't address it, you perhaps are storing up problems for the longer term. And I think there's a lot of support and resources. There's a lot of, you know, I'm happy to talk to people who are looking at, you know, whether they want to put something like an EAP in or some training, you know, hospitality action. We're always happy to have those conversations with people. And I think, you know, again, we've got that additional pressure at the moment because we've got staff shortages as well. You know, that's a fact, and that's going to be putting more pressure on your team. So I think you can't really understate how important looking at wellbeing is in the workplace at the moment. I really think it's really key at the moment.
Definitely. Yeah, totally. We've got a few questions coming in. So we've got quite a couple of people, Phil, who want to know more about the mental health first aiders you were talking about and what they actually do and how you become one.
Sure. So, I mean, it's part of our partnership that was set up with the Burnt Chef Project. They're a really great organisation that we're really proud to support as an organisation. We've also done a really great piece of work with them around signposting their activities across our business. We also take charity donations for them. So we have on our menus now burnt chips, which aren't actual burnt chips because no one wants a bowl of burnt chips, but that's a charity donation to the Burnt Chef Project. But there are also lots of additional resources around mental health first aid. There's some level 2 programs that people can access for free. So there are a lot of resources available. I think explore your local network. I can personally recommend the Burnt Chef, but also look at some of those free resources that are available to you too.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
I'm sure Camilla will have some insights as well.
Mental health first aid, there's loads of really good, as Phil says, kind of practitioners out there. We do something very similar, which is mental health awareness training for teams. It's very similar to mental health first aid. So again, I'm really happy to have conversations with people who are looking at sort of putting in different types of training. We have training around resilience, stress awareness, addiction awareness, all sorts of things that we can do. So yeah, please do reach out. Good place to start is our website, and you can kind of then get in contact with me or one of my team, and we'd be happy to have that conversation.
Amazing. Thank you for that. Yeah, really interesting. I love that initiative. It's really good to see that you know, it's being kind of calling it a first aider is like, you know, it's like physical first aid, you know, they're just as important, like, you know, arguably, like it's nice to see it being recognized like that. Some people in the chat are also asking, you know, we've referenced quite a few like organizations in this chat, which is really useful for further reading, but is there any others in particular that you haven't mentioned that you think are worth checking out as like a first port of call?
No, I mean, I think obviously Mind and Rethink Mental Health are really good. Mental Health Foundation is another one to have a look at. Ourselves, Fair Kitchens, Burnt Chef. Yeah, they are good places to start, really. And I think Mind is a really good one just when you're at the very start of that whole mental health and wellbeing journey, because they have got a lot of good resources that get you lots of top tips about how to get kind of senior management buy-in, how to normalize those conversations, and those really good tips around kind of self-care as well, around ways to wellbeing that you can do quite simply for yourself as well, and get you thinking about things like, reclaim your lunch hour if you can, and things like that, but actually quite simple steps that you can take and just get you thinking a bit about looking after yourself. I think there's something that a psychologist called Dr. Barry looks at about healthy to-do lists, and often we put ourselves at the bottom of our to-do list. So we'll put family, friends, work, everything else, and actually you need to invert it and start with you, because if you're not feeling healthy and happy and productive, it's just going to affect everything else. So that can be quite uncomfortable to say, oh, well, actually, I'm top of my list, but actually you should be top of your list because everything else follows from there. So that's, he's worth a read, actually. He's called Dr. Harry Barry, but he does this whole thing around healthy to-do lists. So if you wanted that sort of more in-depth reading, someone like that is worth having a look at as well.
Amazing, fantastic.
And I'd just say NHS as well, lots of free resources there, really brilliant sites, really great resources on there. Some local education authorities provide support as well. And definitely a lot of the self-care apps as well, to tie in with Camilla's piece around putting yourself first. I think there's some really good apps out there that can support with that too.
Yeah, that's a really good point. As you feel, apps are a great tool. Those mindfulness and brain calm things. So yeah, really good idea.
Yeah, amazing, cool. Another interesting question that's come off the audience. So, speaking of well-being and COVID-19, kind of, we know that we all need certain hygiene protocols now, but we need to be washing our hands, we need to be wearing masks, social distancing, all that. But what else in terms of well-being do you think staff would need to feel comfortable right now, and other than that kind of bare minimum, that's essential basically?
Well, one of the things that we did when we knew that kind of hospitality was reopening, we designed a sort of template questionnaire, which we sent out to our employee assistance program clients and said, this is a sort of return to work check-in, and you can ask people to fill it in confidentially, or they can fill it in and put, their contact details there. But it was just really a check-in with that, how they were feeling. So how did they rate their mental health now compared to what it was like before COVID? But what were their concerns about coming back to work? What could work do to support them? So we sort of addressed it that way, because we know absolutely that kind of the extra pressure of those sort of hygiene protocols, and perhaps dealing with people when you haven't been dealing with people for a year, and then people could be a little bit more challenging because they also haven't been out for a year, and all of those things. So we sort of thought that a sort of check-in like that was a really good place to start, because it gave you that sort of overview of everybody. But again, you could also use that with, if you do return to work one-to-ones, and you could go through a questionnaire like that with someone and say, well, how are you feeling about this, or what could we have done what can we do to support you more? So that would be a good place to start, I would say. But Phil, you may have some more kind of sort of tips from what you've been doing, obviously, because you've been right at the front line reopening and things like that. So
yeah, sure. So very, very similar, actually. We used our wellness action plans, for example, so have a really brilliant conversation around how people are feeling. There were definitely some commonality around concerns. It was important to identify our big burning topics, so handling difficult situations, for example, how we could be more effective at that. So we looked at some resources around that, making sure our people were able to come back in to see, where they were working after a year away, for example, understanding what the changes had been. But really, again, I think a lot of this will come down to a really good conversation. So not just using that return to work, that wellbeing action plan as a tick box, but actually having a really great conversation off the back of it with some clear actions that our managers and people can take away to support.
Amazing. Yeah. It's all about communicating, isn't it? And
always,
we can't stress it enough. Just keep talking, and we're all still figuring it out. So never gonna like just instantly find the answer to this. And so I think that's it for all the questions. So thank you, Phil and Camilla, so much for coming on. That was really interesting. And I think that's going to help a lot of people. This recording will be sent to everyone who signed up's email. I believe we'll be sharing it elsewhere as well. So look out for that. And yeah, just thank you all for coming. It's been a real fun time just talking about this. And I hope you're all taking something away from it that you're gonna use. So yeah, thank you so much for coming. And thanks again, Camilla and Phil. You've been great.
Pleasure. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you. See you. Bye.
Bye-bye.